Thank you so much, David. Appreciate that. And now I want to hand the baton over to Michael Gunter, who is class of 14, and he is the co-chair. So Michael, if you would.
Yes. So just briefly about CBAP. So CBAP is an independent alumni group of Black and other people of color who have coalesced to support the call for and the establishment of a center that institutionalizes the university's commitment to combat and eradicate racism at Princeton and beyond. Our work is strengthened through collaboration with affinity groups, and we work through consensus building to organize around the idea that diverse experiences, views, and skills are indispensable to understand different needs and create sustainable change. The mission of the center is to combat and eradicate racism. The center will support cutting-edge applied research that identifies solutions with the goal of disseminating findings to use for the elimination of racism and remediation of its adverse effects. The center will serve as a curated repository of information chronicling internalized, interpersonal, institutional, and structural racism at Princeton University and beyond. The center will assemble expertise to diagnose and remediate both past and current manifestations of racism. The center will be a source for students, academics, governments, for-profit businesses, nonprofit organizations, as well as the lay public to advance the mission of combating and eradicating racism. The center will seek to fulfill Princeton University's vow to be of service to the nation and to humanity.
All right, I want to thank Michael and David for really kind of setting the table for us, giving a sense of what we are going to be talking about over the next few minutes. But in the meantime, I do want to introduce at least, you've now met both David and Michael, but I'd like to introduce the rest of the panel, beginning with Pat Irvin, class of 76. Yay, she's in my class. She is a senior executive, an attorney, and a former trustee of the board there at Princeton University. And then next is Reginald Ponder, a class of 84. He is a national film critic, a radio personality, and host of a podcast. And then we have Rose Catherine Pinkney. She is class of 86, BET programming executive and color entertainment board member. And finally, we have Marvin Peart, and Marvin is an alumni by choice, let's say for today. He is a producer and a writer. So I want to welcome all of them. I also have an additional last minute addition, and we are thrilled to have her here, but I don't have a lot of information about Sela. So Sela, if you would, can you introduce yourself in about 20 seconds or less?
I sure can. My name is Sela Hampton, class of 2018. I am the Senior Manager for Growth at US Mobile and the founder and CEO of Retail Bookstore.
All right, thank you so much. So I want to thank the entire panel for being here today. And as we say, for hopefully starting some pretty important conversations. And if I can do one thing, and again, this is kind of the 20-second rule, I want to know a little bit about, I'm sorry?
Broke the bone.
It's not making the noise on the floor, it's just making a noise.
Okay, whoever that is, you need to be muted. I believe it's Anne. So Anne, if you would mute yourself, that'd be great. But I want to ask everybody on the panel, and I kind of want to start with us old guys, what your experience was like at Princeton. And again, if you can do it in about 30 seconds or so, but talking a little bit about what you experienced when you came there. And Pat, I want to start with you, class of 76.
I came from a public school system. My father was in the military, so I'd probably gone to about 8 schools by the time I got there. I'd never been exposed to an environment like Princeton before, so it was a very new experience. Most of the people I seem to know, even Black folks, had gone to private schools. And I felt I had a very steep learning curve. Where I got a lot of comfort and support was from the Black community there. It was a great time in our history because of the 60s movement and where we were in the early 70s. We had students were very, Black students as well as other students of color were pretty much very united, and it was, it helped a lot. We had a lot of programs at the Third World Center, and and we really stayed together. I had 3 part-time jobs while I was there. So in addition to studying, I worked a lot and pretty much stayed to myself, but made a lot of friends and have a lot of great memories of that time, and also have a lot of bitter memories of that time, as
All
many
right.
of us do from that period.
Yeah, and I'm going to want to come back to that, but I appreciate that very much. And I believe next is Rose, class of 86. If you talk a little bit about your experience at Princeton, and if you would also kind of maybe throw in how race played a part for you as well. And you want to unmute there, Rose.
Actually, I use the name Rose Catherine as my
Oh,
whole
Rose
first
Catherine,
name.
forgive
That's
me.
okay. So I think that I was in the first year of Curl, which may mean something to some of you and may mean nothing to people. And it was the first years when the university organized itself into residential colleges. And the idea was, I think, to make people bond in smaller groups. And what that actually meant for us was that Black folks were separated more than they ever had been. There was a college called the Princeton and College, PIC, where many Black folks, look at Reggie Reg, many Black folk had chosen to live in this one area. And I really think that Curl was about breaking up PIC. But PIC, Beyond the Third World Center, was the place where Black Princetonians hung. It's where you went to see folk. It's where you went to get tutored. It's where you went to get advice. It's where you went to feel like you were home. So fortunately, we still had remnants of PIC when I came in as a freshman, and that was just really helpful because we always had a place to go. Race, I think for me, I'd gone to a very country school where race was generally not an issue, but economics were an issue, where the fights were amongst people. My mom used to say that the fights in my high school were who was going to be the poorest. So it wasn't really Black versus white or color, anything. It really was about socioeconomics. So coming to Princeton and meeting Black folks from all strata of the universe, including my scholarship self, to people, I actually had never heard of Jack and Jill before I arrived on the Princeton campus. So race for me was not a huge thing at that time because I had the comfort of PIC, of friends who lived at PIC, of friends who could introduce me to the upperclassmen like Reggie Reg, who lived in PIC. Also, Princeton used to have a summer orientation program. And I don't know if any of you guys know about this. It was, I think, like a 6-week program. It's not quite clear how they chose people to go. I remember being at mostly, this is very funny, and I'm very real. I remember a bunch of people of color and one poor white guy who was actually, I think, a football player. He was an athlete on scholarship. But we had 6 weeks in the summer before school started to get acclimated to campus and to meet people. And I think I actually wasn't supposed to be in the program. I happened to find out about it, called on the day that somebody dropped out, and ultimately got into the program, which made my entry into Princeton. Reggie Ponder was one of our guide, our counselors during the 6 weeks. There were so many others. And we had tutoring and we had social time. We got to learn the campus. And that actually made my entry into Princeton amazing.
All right, thank you so much, Rose Catherine. I appreciate that. And you mentioned Reggie Reg. Oh, by the way, in the chat, I see a note from John Carr basically saying, echoing what Rose Catherine just said, PIC was the unofficial Black dorm between the years of 80 and it looks like 85. So thank you so much for that, John. But I do want to get straight to Reggie to kind of round up or finish off this conversation and tell us a little bit about your experience.
So I also came from public school, but I had a superhero already there at school, and that's my brother Reginald and class of 81. And with that, that meant that the Kemp Pearsons of the world were looking out for me at every point and every turn. I have a story that one of the Chicago people, I don't know if it was Lillian or Lel, they told me, look, I cook on Thursdays. Don't tell anybody, but if you need a home cooked meal, you can come to my room. So my indoctrination to Princeton was like so welcoming, with the John Beemans of the world, the Craig Robinsons, and just a whole host of people. When we talk about the Third World Center, we talk about Cerny Braswell and what they did at the Third World Center. I'm a product of the Third World Center. And then when we talk about PIC, I so happened to kind of run that after John Beeman left, because he bequeathed it to me. So from a racial standpoint, I felt really at home there. My first day, however, on campus, people who don't have to do this today, you don't have to stand and register for your classes. We had to do that back in the day. Someone walked up to me and said, the reason their friend didn't get in is because they let me in. So it was a hostile environment. The eating clubs are not what they were, are not what they are today. They were, for me, just totally undesirable. But the Black Princeton staff was very important to the support that we had throughout the university. I had a phenomenal time here, but that's because my brother was already here when I got here. So, hey, thanks, Ryan.
Thank you so much, Reggie. That is perfect. And ask you real quickly, where are you from? Where's home?
Home is Chicago.
Okay, thank you so much. Rose Catherine, I didn't ask you that, but where's home?
I'm from Brandywine, Maryland, a small town south of Washington, D.C.
All right, and Miss Pat, if you'd answer the same question.
Yeah, as I said, I was a military brat. My father was from
Right.
Chicago. Mother was European. I grew up all over.
All right, that sounds great. I want to get to Sela now, because we've heard a little bit of the 70s, certainly some of the 80s, but then we fast all the way forward to 2018. And I want to hear a little bit about your experiences here.
Sure. So I actually came from a private school, but was raised in Atlanta in a public school, middle school environment. So was able to, I think, easily adapt to being away from home and being in a residential community, but immediately had great difficulty with race relations on campus. So in about 2015, 2016, was when kind of the surgence of the Black Lives Matter movement was happening. The Black Justice League formed at Princeton. There were numerous protests happening around campus, and it was just a really tough time to be there, especially with, there's an app called Yik Yak, and imagine Twitter, but anonymous. And so people could post things that were really inflammatory. And it felt challenging to make it through a day of class when you would see these statements that, I won't repeat anything now for the sake of everyone here, but there was great division and great tension my whole time at campus. And that led to me actually taking a year off after my sophomore year. So I certainly struggled with it, but found great camaraderie, less so in this grouping of like thriving Black community that I feel like other alums are describing, and more so within certain student groups. And I have great friends and great memories, but certainly I'm always thinking about how I can make that experience better for students to come, because there's still, I think, a lot of work to be done.
Now, Sela, you were post a Third World Center and PIC. So where did you all kind of hang? And was Carl Fields already built at that point?
Carl A. Field Center was built, but we didn't hang out there. I think in general, there's less of a sense of camaraderie between like all of the Black students on campus. That just didn't really exist as a central element. If anything, we bonded through protest and through how do we have these conversations about how to actually communicate with the administration about the impacts of Woodrow Wilson's name being everywhere on campus, and how do we react to this monument that was built in his honor to tell the complete story, as opposed to using those funds to tackle food security that Black students have on campus. So it was more so a connecting interest through planning and organizing, as opposed to having a center for connection that we would have found at Carl A. Fields or anything like that.
And how did you feel when they removed the name of Woodrow Wilson from virtually everything?
A long time coming. I think that we were all really excited to see that progress can and will be made, that again stretches towards the right side of justice, but while we were on campus and having those conversations, it was certainly difficult to feel like we were being aptly heard by the administration. So it's great to see, and as we continue to come back and to reform our relationship to the university and how we want to continue to uplift the institution and make it a better place, it's great to see these progressive steps.
All right, thank you so much to all of the panelists. And I want to go back to where David and Michael started and really have a conversation about that. And fellows, if either one of you would like to talk about this, what was the concern at the time that you formed CBAP? You must have had some conversations with folks and finally decided, you know what, we just got to do something.
So I'll start and try to pick up on some of the themes that we've had already. It's interesting that Rose Catherine mentioned Curl. So I was the next class, so it was already a fait accompli. So we didn't know about what Princeton in had been. We didn't know what the consequences in. But in my sophomore year, I made an observation to university officials that there were no residential advisors of color. I proceeded to protest that and almost got ground up in the process. Like Sela, eventually I was so despondent that I ended up taking a year off, but had kind of put Princeton in my kind of rear view mirror for many, many years. And then, as Black Lives Matter started and other things started happening, and hearing people like Sela say that the same things were still happening at Princeton, I think myself, as long with a lot of other people in CBAP, said, okay, we got to get re-engaged with the university and really go back into, as one of the people in the room said, go back into the belly of the beast and really try to get the ship turning in a different direction. So that was really the inspiration of what got most people re-engaged and involving in CBAP as volunteers to try to make a difference at Princeton.
And CBAP was really kind of formed 2 years ago, would you say?
It started as kind of a ragtag fugitive force in 2020, and then we incorporated in 2021. And we've been off to the races since. We've formed a proposal for the center. We have been raising operating funds for the university. We've been engaging with all the other affinity groups across the spectrum. So it started as an initiative of Black alumni, but we are working with ALPA, A4P, Native Americans of Princeton. I wear two hats because I'm also from BT Gala. We're enlisting them as well to try to give a uniform voice that there are people that the university has overlooked. That's a kind word. But we need to do better as Princeton and leverage the resources of a tremendous research institution to come up with not just a categorization of racism, but how can we combat and eradicate racism?
And I want to come back to the whole issue of a research center in just a moment. But there was really this sense of frustration that so many students, all these years later, we're still experiencing the same sort of thing. That's such an important concept. And David, if you will sort of talk a little bit about that as well, what the frustration was at that moment that made you all say, we got to do something.
Well, I mean, we didn't maybe make it specific, but it was born out of George Floyd's murder. And I'll speak for myself for this. I don't want to have another day, week, month go by where these events keep happening and we haven't done something to make the world a better place.
All right.
When you hear people like Sela and other students saying that the same things are happening at Princeton, in my case, 35 years later to the day, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah. And David, thank you so much. I actually meant to call in Michael. So Michael, wherever you are, if you'll speak just real quickly about that as well, what the motivation was, what drove you at that moment.
So I came through CBAP through an email. I don't know how they received my name, but I received an email about this cause. And because of the George Floyd murder and what was going on during this period of time, that was my call to action, because I believe Princeton has the ability to provide resources that can last beyond my existence, beyond my presence. I thought if they invested in a center, if they invested in something that it could live past me, it could live past all of us. So trying to realize that sort of immortality of fighting racism through an applied research center was my motivation.
All right, thank you so much. I want to make sure that I leave a few minutes at the end. So let me say that right now, in case anyone has any burning questions. So as we continue our conversation, if you guys out there, if you have
Melanie?
any questions, yeah.
Before we do that, because otherwise I'm going to get hit over the head, can we invite Marvin into the conversation? He is not Princeton alum. He made a tragic mistake of becoming my friend. And so I wanted to invite him into the conversation and talk about some of the things he's doing to try to change Hollywood.
I'm so sorry, Marvin. Yes, I know you are there somewhere. If you will jump in.
I was happy to just sit here and listen, to be honest. I mean, listen, you know, racism's everywhere, right? You say, how do we combat it? How do we stop it? We'll tell racists just to stop being racist. So it's just not that simple. In Hollywood, you know, even for me, you know, a company that I started 3 years ago, 101 Studios, you know, we have the biggest show in America, Yellowstone with Kevin Costner, and 1883 and Mayor of Kingstown with Jeremy Renner. And when I meet people and talk to people and I say, yeah, it's my company, I literally incorporated, I started it. People look at me like I have 18 heads. And even for me, with even that level of success, you know, raising capital is still the easiest thing. It's gotten easier, but I'm still trying to, you know, change how people view people of color in our industry by making things that aren't typical of people that look like me would make, a la Yellowstone, The War with Grandpa, line, you know, just product that's not typical. Moving forward, I'd like to make more movies with people of color because it's closer to my DNA. But in order to change the conversation, you need to do things that people don't expect you to do, and that's been my mission. So that's how I plan on changing things in Hollywood.
That sounds great, Marvin, and so glad you're part of this panel. Of course, expect to get a few resumes via chat.
I would like to say, though, I was accepted to Princeton and Brown and chose Bentley University, a smaller school outside of Waltham, Massachusetts. So no disrespect to the Princeton. It was by choice.
Absolutely, no offense taken. And by the way, we're all looking at you and thinking we should have gone to Bentley. But thank you so much. Appreciate that. I do want to dive into, and I'm so glad we're talking about how these experiences sort of moved across so many generations here. I want to talk about one of the things that CBAP is very focused on, and that is creating this research center. And why that is such an important aspect of all of this. And Pat, I want to bring you back into this and just ask you, what do you think something like that would benefit the university, but more importantly, benefit people of color?
In the wake of George Floyd, a number of prominent institutions looked at themselves and tried to figure out what role they wanted to play in addressing racism. Some of them had started earlier, as we know. Ruth Simmons, way back in 2003, when she was president of Brown, initiated this effort to take a look at Brown and its role in slavery, but none of the other Ivies had done anything like that before then. And the idea that came up out of this letter that the faculty wrote about wanting Princeton to be an anti-racism institution was to have a center like this. And a number of other institutions had it, more and more have them now. Princeton is one of the few universities that hasn't had a major anti-racism either center or council or some other initiative of that sort. Yale has it. Harvard has something. Obviously American University, Boston, we know that. The reality is that whenever an institution as prominent as Princeton is on this planet, takes an action, everybody on the planet pays attention to it. So number one, if Princeton were to have such a center, it would make a statement to the world about how important addressing racism is. Second, if Princeton were to set up a center like that, it would be saying something to the entire Princeton community, to the faculty, to the administrators, to the alumni, to the students, about what its values are, about how it sees marginalized people who are on campus, who are its students, who are its alumni. And Princeton hasn't had the best reputation in this regard. I think Sella talked about how she felt on campus in the more recent years that she was there. It can be a very lonely feeling to be Black and be on campus. So the second thing is, what are we saying to members of the Princeton community? Further, a center like that, and more recently, through the efforts of CBAP, they've fine-tuned what the mission of CBAP to be an applied research center, which is great, because it means that they will not just be doing research and studying. It means that they are advocating for the university to have a center that would actually take action, that would advocate for policies. And as an applied research center, they could bring together activists, advocates, practitioners, legislators, to actually develop specific innovative policies and action plans and work with community leaders to implement them. And they can challenge existing policies that are racist and oppressive. And at the university itself, Princeton can be a resource to build multidisciplinary initiatives to foster racial justice. They can get departments working with each other on projects of all sorts. I could imagine, for instance, the architecture department and the engineering department and the art museum and the sociology department working on a project together to develop a blueprint for low-income housing that's aesthetically beautiful, that's practical, that's energy efficient, that's enjoyable, joyful to be at. We don't have anything like that really here in this country. European countries do. The center could develop ways to increase racial literacy, which really isn't being done in a concerted way in this country. In fact, a Princeton student who's graduating this year co-authored a couple of books with a Harvard student on racial literacy, something that educators could use. And then, the other thing that has been talked about that the faculty proposed that I think is a great idea is the development of a basic course that everybody would be required to take. I think it's a great idea. A history course that addresses thoroughly the role of slavery in our country, the role that it played in building this economic powerhouse, but not just slavery, all of the other things that occurred in our history, the taking of lands from Native Americans, what that meant. How Europeans came to America, to the Americas, they took possession of it. For Europeans, it meant a surplus of land, the end of famine, 4 centuries of economic growth. But for others, it meant that 4 million Africans were brought to this country forcibly, and 50 million Native Americans died, mostly of disease, were displaced, and so forth. So I think, I envision a 2-semester basic required course that would have to be taken that deals with all of these issues, our role in wars and how we fought those wars, our geopolitical role, and so forth.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna just.
Sorry, I went on and on.
No, because it was fantastic. It was very, we appreciate the breadth of what you're saying here and sort of laying it out for us. But I do want to get on to a couple of other people real quickly. Reggie and Sela, and I'll let you all kind of arm wrestle for who wants to speak first. But what she's talking about, does that appeal to you? For instance, Sela, would you have been thrilled to have that kind of opportunity or that kind of interaction while you were here?
I definitely would have appreciated, and I think that there are ways even that topics and curriculum can tie into existing required courses. So there's a writing seminar, for example, and those writing seminars have a variety of topics which span from reading great mythological works and understanding philosophers to reading romantic comedies. And so to me, there are stepping stones that the university can make, not immediately, but close to immediately, that start to address some of these issues and that allow students, the full student body, to have to engage with these topics. And I think it's really pertinent to me because I think that there are ways to get through Princeton and not have to engage in hard conversations about race. There are ways to slip into different pathways and be in your friend groups and follow perhaps a legacy path and not ever have to encounter someone that's unlike you, whether that is because of race or socioeconomic background or any other differentiator. And I think that the university, in my opinion, has an obligation as their one to espouse and to create these leaders who will have positions of power throughout the country, throughout the world, to say, here's a critical look at race relations in this country. Here's an understanding of how to engage and to have a conversation and to generate a vernacular and a language for you to be able to engage, as opposed to being entered into a world where perhaps, yes, it does mimic, again, kind of the primarily white and affluent environment that Princeton exists in. But as our world continues to diversify and as we think about equity beyond our own orange bubble, we have to have the tools. And I think the university is doing a disservice perhaps to its students who it allows to get through those 4 years, or if you're in grad school, more than 4 years, without being able to have those important conversations and be able to engage critically in conversations about race relations.
And Reggie, I want to ask you, do you see any major changes at the university, certainly with regard to systemic racism? And we're going to all just sort of agree that it happens at Princeton as much as it does anywhere else, as Marvin pointed out just a few minutes ago. But do you see any major changes that give you, a sense of hope, or at least an assumption that things will improve over the years? And do you think that center would add to that?
It's interesting when you speak to people who have come out much later than I have. So you're asking me from '84. I laugh at that, but when you talk to younger folks and learning that they're experiencing some of the exact same stuff that we were experiencing, even with the discussions on DE&I and trying to be better, the system, it takes so long to move it. You know that the whole thing about the iceberg. I mean, it's just an iceberg, and so it's really hard to move. So I just think, in general, I don't think systemically the university has changed. I do think that there's some cosmetic things that the university is doing to try to either really address the issue or cover up the issue, whichever side you might be on that. But your other question was, would I like something like that? I think one of the things that was outlined here is that the center will cultivate a new paradigm for how students see themselves in the world. And if we talk about that just from the industries, the industries that I'm in, I work in DE&I, I work in film, and I work in education because I teach, I review movies, and I actually work in marketing for DE&I. So when you look at all that, just having representation for how people will see themselves, all the research shows that when you can see it, you can really start to believe that you can be there in corporate and every other place that you're at. So would a center help with that? Absolutely. What I'm really more interested in, though, is not the research part. There's so much research out there. We got a lot of research. I want to just bring up one. So in my field, the USC Annenberg Initiative shows that film critics are, which I am one, the top film critics are 88% male, white male, 88% white male. And that if you look at, critics of color, Men critics of color is about 14%. But when you look at women critics of color, it's less than 3%. So if you have so they have the research, they already know what's out there. So I like this implementation part. I like this applied part. That applied part really gets me excited. How we're going to start to apply it, and not just apply it at Princeton. I love this leadership piece that Pat talks about, is that Princeton lead, and then people will look at it and say it must be important. But I really love this whole thing about being applied, and I'll stop there.
All right, thank you so much, Reggie. And Rose Catherine, I'm gonna drag you in on this since he was one of your heroes back in the day.
Yes, he was.
Whoever that is, bless you, and you need to mute. Whoever can sneeze, but bless you. I want to make sure I say that.
So I will say that, like, I don't know who could oppose such an idea. When I learned about this effort, one of the things I thought about, and it's so simple, is that Black people and people of color have always been resourceful. Always. We've always had to be. And the idea of putting resourceful people together with the most highly intelligent people in the world, the people that walk through those gates, to work on racism is amazing to me. Like, I feel like there is nothing that we can't do as a group of people. I did not really understand the difference between applied research and just research until recently as well. And I think, as Reggie said, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of people, I call it the George Floyd years. There's a lot of people talking diversity and inclusion. There's a lot of people who are trying to do things, but it's the actual action that makes a difference. I'm going to tell you quickly something that BET is doing. We have something called Content for Change that our big CEO thought up. And it's the idea that we should sounds simple, use content for change. But if you are only going to the same people over and over and over, nothing's going to change. But what they're trying to do is a lot of the things that you are doing with this proposed research center, but in the entertainment business. One of the things that they discovered was that a lot of young people of color don't get to the entertainment industry because they don't have 4-year degrees. Now, there are a lot of different ways to get into the industry, and you don't have to have a 4-year degree, but it certainly helps. It certainly opens doors. So they've started a small program where they have brought in 20 young people of color who decided not to go off for 4-year degrees, and they are putting them through sort of associates program where they can come and learn things in the business. But what I loved about that when I heard it is that it is meeting the issue head on. And yes, right now there's only 20, but they did research and figured out that this is why a lot of people weren't coming in the door. Like, they didn't have the ability to get a 4-year degree or didn't want a 4-year degree, and felt like that they were excluded. So to me, the great thing about applied research is that you can make change with some of the simplest information all the way up to the most complicated information, but we have to act. And we've got to, the other thing that I find is that a lot of times people are doing programs and research, but not actually talking to the people that they are researching, not actually talking and dealing with the real issue. It's more on this level as opposed to on a ground floor level. And I feel like an institute like this would understand that difference and, be able to dig a little deeper than people who don't know the real struggles that we're having.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rose Catherine. Great points there. And I want to bring Marvin in right now if he's got a minute, just because he mentioned something when he first introduced himself about how this happens everywhere. And especially with you all, Rose Catherine, y'all are in the entertainment industry. What did you do you think, to change things, Marvin? Because I think we've all seen a dramatic change just in the amount of content that's out there for people of color over the last few years. So what did the folks in Hollywood and in entertainment do to sort of push the ball forward?
Well, I think obviously the murder of George Floyd had massive impact throughout the world and definitely hit Hollywood, but a very large and well-respected marketing consultant firm McKinsey did a study a year and a half ago that said Hollywood is literally leaving 10 billion annually on the table by ignoring diverse creators and diverse stories. And I think that is also pushing the needle. You know, everybody's got a way in which they'd like to contribute, but you know, POV is everything. POV happens from birth. POV is everything. And when you have a person that looks at something a little differently, no matter what the story is, depending on your background and where you're from, you look at that story a little differently. If I, as a African-American producer, financier, writer, et cetera, were to make The Godfather, I might have changed the ending because I see the story in a different way, given my background and my makeup. So I think Hollywood is taking notice purely because it's the right thing to do, which is third, but because it makes dollars and cents, which is first and second.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I think, in fact, I had a chance to talk to the head of Disney, who I worked for a couple of years ago. And this was pre-George Floyd, but we were talking about Black Panther. And he said, well, you know, it was tough to get the folks in our department to do it initially because they said, well, we can't really sell that overseas. Black movies don't sell overseas. And he said, well, we're going to take a chance. And, you know, $1 billion later, they have no problems making other kinds of movies. So Marvin, your point is so very well taken. Even in the most altruistic things, it gets right down to how's my money? How's this going to work for me?
Just to add to that, just to add to that, in terms of financing, you know, it's one thing when a studio is making a film like Black Panther or something smaller. The economics are so different. As an independent financier, the barrier to entry is the international marketplace, because as you're looking to finance a movie where there's basically 3 parts to the financial plan, it's international sales, tax incentives, and equity. You know, when a movie can't get the dollars that, say, a white movie can independently overseas, that's just a lot more money you have to put into a movie, which is, again, the issue of raising capital. So if I make an all-Black movie for 20 million bucks, and I can't get the dollars out of international, but I can get, you know, 4 or 5 million out of a tax incentive, which still leaves a delta of 15 or 16 million bucks. I now have to raise 15 or 16 million bucks in order to make that movie. And that's a lot of equity to have against North America. You know, so it's a quandary, and it still needs to be figured out. And the answer really isn't making lower budget movies, because there is something called production value. You want to look at people of color in the same lighting and the same spacing and the same sort of value that you look at other, you know, white films in. So it's a quandary, and it still needs there's a lot of work to do.
Melanie, if I may,
Yeah.
I love what Marvin talks about on this whole thing about production value, because when you're watching these streaming services and you're watching different things, you're saying to yourself, it doesn't look good. It just doesn't look up to snuff. So I love the fact that he brought that in. I just want to also mention that back in the day, people might not remember, but there were only 4 stations to watch. Today, the difference, because we have this proliferation of content, is because there are 15,000 streaming services out there to purchase, and content is king. So everybody's looking for content. So that also increases the availability of the stuff that we're watching today. So I just want to make sure that we look at the landscape has changed drastically today with the whole streaming industry.
I do want to go back to, and as I say, we've been kind of talking around the edges about it, but the death of George Floyd, and we, I think now all tend to see life in terms of before George Floyd and after. But not only that incident, but so many things that happened in the wake of that, and certainly how it propelled the Black Lives Movement even more out there. Do you see that as having pushed major change at the university, or do you still feel like we're kind of on the edge there? And anybody can jump in at this point.
At Bentley or at Princeton? I'm just kidding.
Good point. Yes, thank you, Marvin, for always broadening the conversation. But any of our panelists have a feeling about that? I guess not. Maybe we want to move on to a couple. Yeah, we won't even. Yeah, go ahead.
I could say something. I think that Princeton, just like other organizations, corporations, and other institutions, whether they're universities or foundations, whatever, there was an immediate, intense reaction with a lot of promise. And you know, as I say to people, we didn't reach the mountaintop that Martin Luther King talked about, but I think we reached another plateau. You know, we made a major step. And I think a lot of it kind of petered out. But we did make some progress. And
Yeah.
and
Go ahead.
I don't think that progress was insignificant, but it was nowhere near enough. And part of the reason why I think a center would be important at Princeton is because it would give, at our university, it would give sustained attention to the issue of racism. It would be harder to just let it drop, you know, if you have a center, an anti-racism, you know, applied research center.
Thank you so much, Pat. I appreciate that. I'm going to pull just a couple of comments and or questions out of the chat room. And one of them was, I believe it was Fred Dashiell, and I'm looking for it, who basically asked if we could do it all over again, would we have gone to an HBCU instead, since there were so many things at Princeton that comforted us, and most of it involved being around folks like you. I remember the Third World Center, for me, it was the realization that it wasn't just Black folks who needed a lot of these things, but it was also, you know, folks of Latin descent, Asian folks, Native Americans. And for once we had a place where we could form a coalition. But I'll just ask that quick question. If we had the opportunity, would an HBCU have done more for us?
So Melanie, I'm happy to kick that off because I thought about it many times. My sister actually wanted to go to Spelman, and my parents wouldn't let her go. And I thought about the reasoning then and the reasoning now. And again, I'll come back to the comment that one of her CBAP members made in kind of a way of saying being in the belly of the beast. And if you want to change what's happening around race, you maybe have a better vantage point at a place like Princeton where you can form these broader coalitions. So we talked about that CBAP started initially by Black alumni, but it quickly incorporated Latino and Asian and Native Americans, and it gives me such great joy. And one of the things I think where I have some hope that maybe George Floyd was the difference is we have a lot of white alumni who've joined CBAP as well, and I see a lot of white faces in the audience today and online. And for that, I'm truly grateful. So I do hope that this will be a starting point, and I think that Princeton is the place to do it.
That's a great point. I appreciate that. I also want to mention Greg Duncan's question, class of '84. And he says, look at the majority of solutions the university has proposed or implemented, make it seem as though racism is simply a matter of diversity and inclusion. Trying to tackle any innovation or societal issue without understanding the impact of historical and structural racism is like trying to fathom the universe without knowing about carbon. It seems like an educational malpractice not to ensure that every student who passes through the gates has the understanding, no matter their major or discipline. So what can be done to get the university to recognize racism in a structural issue, or to be a structural issue that goes way beyond diversity and inclusion? Good question. Anybody want to express themselves on that one?
Yeah, Greg is my brother-in-law, so we have these,
okay.
We have these discussions all the time. And I do think that there's always this mistake to think that maybe you can get some numbers here, maybe you can do some inclusion stuff, but that really doesn't move the iceberg. And so I agree with what Pat just said about if you have a center, then it doesn't die. Then you have a real focus on what the mission is. And then if Pat talked about having these classes, so where students would go through. Now that doesn't necessarily combat this systemic racism or structural racism, but it helps the students who are there. If we're talking about Princeton in this nation's service, then when we start to send people out, they hopefully will have a different idea or a different thought about what they're doing out in the world and how they're approaching some of these issues. The systemic thing is really tough because it really goes against the grain of some of the things the university wants to do and probably actually wants to maintain. So it's a tough road, I think. I'm sorry for rambling there, but
No, good points. I appreciate that. And by the way, I want to give credit where it's due. It was Paul Canyon who asked that question about whether or not many of us would have chosen an HBCU instead. I'm looking to see here if there's something else that is really burning here. I think going back to, and this hasn't been brought up, but looking at some of the other affinity organizations we have had on the campus. Of course, we still have ABPA, and now the Carl Field Center is there. Why do some of you feel as though perhaps that's not enough, that we do need something separate in the way of a research center and also just different ways for people to be able to speak, people of color?
Oh,
I thought I would just go there for a second.
Oh, hi. I think both Michael and I have some thoughts on that, but one of the things that quickly became apparent to many of us in CBAP is a couple of things. One, we wanted to broaden the group. We didn't want this to just be Black alumni because there were similar experiences in other people of color and other people who felt out of the mainstream of the university. We also wanted to be laser focused on the creation of the center. And a lot of these other affinity groups are distracted with multiple objectives that they're trying to accomplish. Pat mentioned that there was, a list of things that the faculty and the students were calling for. We wanted to pick one specific thing and say, let's get the university to do the center, right? As opposed to, many different things. So that's really what CBAP has been. It's broadening our coalition and focusing, laser focused on creating the center.
Right. I'm looking at a couple of other comments here. Tona Gilbert said, glad to have such thoughtful, intelligent conversations, articulate, quote, if I can use that word, people dealing with this issue. It makes me very hopeful. And this is Ashley Briscoe, class of 2011. Like Sela, I haven't really accepted ABPA. There wasn't really anything that would gather people together by circumstance. So just an interesting point of view there. But as we wrap up, because I see we're getting very close to our witching hour, as you look at some of the changes on campus, and for instance, I'm thinking about the decision to change West College into Toni Morrison College at this point. And there was at least some research done on slavery over the last few years, slavery at Princeton. And we learned some pretty shocking, if not surprising things about just how deep that went for so many years. Do you feel as though those are just sort of putting toes in the water, or is that something to be built upon? And Pat, as you've talked so extensively about this institute, at this art research center, what do you think? Do any of those represent, major steps forward, or are they just, nice, but not necessarily as much advancement as we'd like to see? More symbolic, perhaps.
I've spoken on a couple of panels in the last couple of years about symbolism. One with Mike Signer, class of '83, I think. He was the mayor of Charlottesville during the Summer of Hate, when they had that march. And last year I spoke on a panel with a Woodrow Wilson scholar and some others about the issue of the Woody Woo and the name and other name changes. I believe that symbolism is very important. It wouldn't have been our major issue 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. But I do feel that symbolism is important. As I said, what major institutions do, how they act is important. So I don't think it's insignificant that we change the name of Woody Woo. I'm certainly glad we did. I think it's important to, that we name West College, Toni Morrison, that sends a message. But in and of itself, it's not enough. And as someone pointed out, diversity and inclusion and all of that good stuff really isn't enough. It isn't enough to just have, a Black person, every 10th person, in the seed at McCosh, whatever. It doesn't change. It doesn't change how people are treated. It doesn't change their opportunities. It doesn't change the viewpoints of people. You have to do more. And the Anti-Racism Center could play a major role in bringing that about. It is a different meaning to deal with racism head on, systemic racism. And even that word racism, which we have been made to feel is a dirty word that we shouldn't be using. And only since George Floyd's death have I heard that word used as fearlessly as it has been by people of color, particularly Black people. Makes a difference. We have to deal with it head on. So we need both. Yeah. Symbolic changes and the, and the real dismantling of systemic racism.
Thank you so much, Pat. And I'm going to propose that question to everybody else real quickly as we wrap up. I do want to at least note Robert Martinez in the chat room said, we should not get too far down the how could anyone ever oppose this proposal rabbit hole, because there will be plenty of opposition, perhaps not open and strident, but it will be there. But in the end, there will be a real problem. This will apply to the center, to required courses, etc. So just cautioning us that this is not a kumbaya moment by any stretch of the imagination. But I did want to allow our panelists to kind of wrap up each one of them. Sela, if you want to throw out a couple of words for us as the youngster on the panel, that would be great. If you feel as though if you're drawing some hope and encouragement, if I can put it like that, from the idea of CBAP. Yes.
With apologies, Kush is waving at me frantically. He wanted to see if there were any questions in the room first.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And Kush is the man in charge, so he'll tell me about.
We're all afraid of Kush.
Oh, yes, exactly. Kush, do you have some questions there? I've just been pulling them from the chat.
I'm Brooke Johnson. I'm actually a current grad student in chemistry. Thank you so much for welcoming me into the space. My question is, what are the major blocks of the Center for Applied Research? Is it financial? Is it like just not enough people on board? What is the major block for a Center for Applied Research focusing on justice and anti-racism?
Thank you.
Kush, I didn't hear all of that. So if you can just give me a quick synopsis of what she asked.
Brooke asked if it was what was the major block for having a center such as the one with
Okay, my hearing is going. Okay, sorry about that. Can I ask David, are you guys in a place where you can hear?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So what was asked was, what are the major blocks to getting this center started, to getting people on board for this center? What are the major blocks currently stopping it?
All right, Reggie, you want to tackle that real quickly?
I believe.
I think that would probably be better. I think that'll probably be better for the two gentlemen there because I don't know what's stopping it.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay. All right. So David, Michael, that throws it back into your camp.
Yeah. What I would say is that we've gotten tepid support from the university. And what we are trying to do is mobilize support from throughout the Princeton community to drive this initiative faster and with more urgency. I think, as some people have pointed out, Princeton has kind of been, I think one of the speakers that Pat mentioned that a lot of other universities have already done this. And what we're trying to say to the university is it's time to catch up, right? We don't have any more time to waste. We just had Buffalo in the immediate past. We don't have any more time to wait for you to continue to plod along about starting a center. So like I said, tepid response, and we need, people like you in the audience, please go to our website and sign the petition. Really we need to bang the drum to tell the university it's time.
And if you would, just give us the website real quickly. I saw it in the chat room, but if you would say it.
CBAPinfo.com, CBAPinfo.com.
Okay, thank you so much. Want to find out if there are any more questions there in the room. Kush, if you see anybody else.
While you're looking for that, can I just say I echo what Bob Martinez had to say about it's not going to be very easy. I don't think the university, while they've been friendly, I don't think they've been particularly receptive to the idea. It's not easy to get, you know, whatever the topic is, it's not easy to get a new center, department, program going, but there would be a lot of resistance to it in certain quarters. You know, certain constituents of the university. It takes a lot of money to do something like that. And I haven't heard anything said from any side other than CBAP and some, you know, Black alums and so forth that leads me to believe that there's a lot of receptivity to the concept. In fact, I pointed out to Paco, Lionel Jean-Baptiste, that there was an announcement recently, I think in the last couple of weeks, about the eFront Center for American Studies. And I encourage people to go to the website and look at it, that indicated it had wording in there about its role working with multiple departments on issues of race and ethnicity and all of that, that made me wonder if that role that CBAP saw for an anti-racism center was somehow being folded into the eFront Center. So I encourage people to look at that, including CBAP leadership.
All right, well, I'm gonna start to wrap this up because we're about 10 minutes after. Kush, did you have another question in the room? And then I'm gonna ask you
One more question.
one more question. All right. And by the way, Kush, would you come up to the front so we can see the person who put this all together? I think he is walking away. Okay.
Are you hear me now on the virtually as well as in the room?
You're a little echoey, but if you just keep shouting, we'll be good.
And David Peart, he's, well, he can introduce himself and ask the question.
Well, I'll be quick. David Peart, class of 82. I'm interested in how the research agenda is supposed to be established. I'm particularly curious about is there thinking that how to get people to talk about racism differently? Is that something we're thinking about? I think when we have white folks with racism problem, and then have to think about how they talk to each other. That's a research applies to questions. You know, that's a part of your vision of your agenda for research.
Okay, again, the audio is a little muddy there. So Kush, if you can kind of shout out his question, very short version of it.
Are we going to, I was listening as well as I should, but
So I think I got it. What is the
Okay, Michael.
What is the what's the vision for the plan of research? Because David mentioned how like how people talk to one another. So how did we have an idea of how we set the plan for the vision of the research for this applied research center?
Do one of you guys?
How we're going to communicate with people when half of the white population in the United States doesn't believe there is a racism problem. The other half understands that there is, and how are we going to research the discussion that's between our white citizens and bridge that gap between what's spoken about amongst themselves, even if they're on opposite sides. And that was basically the crux of the question. And
all right, Kush, let us try to answer that. Okay, let us try to answer that, and I'm throw it out to the panelists. Sela or Reggie, do you all feel as though you want to tackle that?
I think what David is putting out there is that we do need to have in mind, how do we have the tough conversations? Is just providing the information, even in a classroom setting, is that enough to have those tough conversations and to facilitate those tough conversations, because you can have the class and people can go through the class and be like, yeah, right, and get all the questions right and take the test. But really, how do you have those conversations? And I would hope that the center that will be part of that mission, because we're trying to change something systemically. So I would hope that making sure that we have those tough conversations and delving into that is a part of that.
All right. And as we wrap this up, because now we're a few minutes over time, I do want to thank Rose Catherine and Marvin. I believe both of them have had to jet off to bigger, better things, but we really appreciate their time. And Rose Catherine just said how much she enjoyed being a part of the panel. But I do want to give Sela an opportunity to say a few words as we wrap this up. Reggie, I'm going to let that be your last word if you're good with it, and Pat ditto. And then we want to hear real quickly from, if not Kush, at least from Michael and David. But Sela, please, if you would just sort of give me some sense of how you feel, first of all, after this conversation, but how you look at things going forward from here.
I'm extremely heartened to have been a part of this panel and to have this conversation and to meet other alums who are concerned with these issues. I think, as was previously mentioned, it is really easy to feel alone in this space and to feel like there isn't, therefore, an opportunity or an inroads to have the conversations about how to change a place that has perhaps caused harm or caused trauma. And to the question of how do we have those tough conversations, it is so important for me as we reach towards solutions that we don't ask people to recall and use their trauma as teaching experiences for others. I think it can be extremely harmful to ask someone to relive or to use their lived experience. Specifically, let's say we have a Black student in a room of white students, to ask them for their personal experience as a means to teach a group of white students. And it is therefore extremely thrilling to talk amongst peers in this way and to be able to share an environment that is so open and that feels really trusting. So I appreciate everyone's participation here today. And I think that it leaves me feeling really positive about the future, that to be able to continue these conversations with the type of rigor that comes from the world of academia and how that applies to research, and marry that with the social applications and how that is spread to a broader audience through entertainment. We need all of those solutions and all of those ideas to get to a point where we can have the conversations and everyone has the platform to listen and understand them. So thank you all so much for having me today. And I'm excited to be on campus later this afternoon and to fellowship with some of you all in person.
Well, thank you so much, Sela. And I have to tell you, you get a shout out from one of your fans. Adriana said, Sela, so wonderful to have you here along with the rest of the panel. So grateful for all of the power and presence of people that care deeply about this important issue. So wanted to make sure you knew we were giving you a shout out, and we appreciate your viewpoint so much. David, Michael, do you all have any final thoughts?
I'll give Marvin a chance. He's still here to offer.
Oh my goodness, is Marvin still here? I thought I lost him.
Yeah, no, I'm good. I'm listening.
Oh, my apologies.
Happy to be a part of it. And if I ever go back for my MBA, I'll put Princeton on the list.
Okay, I won't tell you we don't have a business school.
Oh,
Just actually, you can come back and teach a lot of us what to do. So I think that might be the better plan. I don't know if you need to learn or if you just need to share at this point.
Happy to do a course on film finance, TV finance. Happy to be a speaker for the day, whatever you want. I like to share.
Well, and Marvin, we appreciate you so much. I saw you put your email, I think it was, in the chat. So everybody, before you go, you might want to rush there and check it out. But we appreciate, Marvin, your expertise outside of the small universe we're talking about here at Princeton. It really helps to look at it from a much broader perspective. So thank you very much.
You're
and
welcome.
Michael, David, either one of you all have any final words?
Yes, so it would be neglectful if I didn't ask you all to visit cbapinfo.com or email us at cbap@cbapinfo.com. So that's first. But several final thoughts. We don't have a vision for the research that's going to happen at the center. We can't possibly have a vision. We don't know the possibilities. We don't know what we don't know, what we're not thinking of about what we don't know about racism. So, so the center, we just want to establish a center to get people to think about these ideas we haven't yet thought of. And I'm a bit of a hardliner in that I, as young as I am, relatively, don't have the time to change every heart and mind. I need to change laws. I need to change policy. I need the work to be done, because that's what's going to end racism. What's in someone's heart, that's great to change, and I hope it does. But if it doesn't, I want policy and I want laws in place that protect me in spite of any sort of racism. And that's why the applied portion is so important.
Thank you so much, Michael. David?
I just want to say that our tagline is a coalition to combat racism. And today, when I look on the screen and I look in this room, I see the coalition that can combat racism. So thank you all for joining us. Please visit our website and please help us to end racism.
And again, you guys, the website is cbap.info. Is that right?
cbapinfo.com.
CBAP. Okay, got it. I think it's also in the chat. I've got it there. I want to wrap that, but Kush, before we go, can you move into the range of the camera so we can all see you, and thank you for putting together this panel?
Well,
There we go. All right, let me give you my clap over here. We appreciate you. And he has on the coolest t-shirt of all. It says Princeton, but it's got a picture of Prince on it. So it's the bomb t-shirt. I love that. But Kush, thank you so much. Kush, do you want to say something real quickly before you go?
Sorry, I want to thank everyone for coming, everyone for joining the panel, and our moderator this afternoon, Melanie, Lawson.
Well, thank everybody for coming. And I want to especially thank all of the panelists. We really appreciated your points of view. And I'm going to leave somebody's name out, but Sela and Reggie and David and Michael and Marvin and Rose Catherine. I think I got just about everybody. And of course, Kush, who put this all together. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate it. Enjoy reunions, and we hopefully will have more invigorating conversations like this as we move a little bit closer to coming up with that Applied Research Center. So thank you so much, and have a great day and a great weekend, everybody.